She's been asking for you, her sister said quietly. They've got her on heavy medication, but she's lucid enough to understand. The camera panned to their mother, small and fragile against the white sheets. Her eyes were closed, breath shallow. Sarah felt tears welling up as she watched the oxygen mask fog rhythmically. "Mom?" she whispered. "It's Sarah. I'm here." Her mother's eyes fluttered open, focusing somewhere off camera. A weak smile crossed her face. "Both my girls," she murmured. "Together again." Sarah frowned. "Can she see me properly? The screen seems dark on my end." Her sister adjusted the tablet. "Better?" "Mom, I'm so sorry I haven't been there. I love you. I need you to know that." Her mother's expression changed to confusion. "But you are here, Sarah, right beside me. You've been here all week." Sarah felt her chest tighten. "What? No, I'm at home. I'm on video chat." Her sister's face came back into frame, and Sarah noticed for the first time how pale she looked. That's not possible," her sister whispered. "Sarah, you died in the car crash last month. That's why Mom's here." The grief gave her a heart attack. Sarah's hands began to shake. "This isn't funny. I'm alive. I'm sitting in my kitchen right now." "Sarah," her sister's voice cracked. "Look behind you." She turned slowly. Her kitchen was exactly as she'd left it, except for the calendar on the wall. Last month's page showed a large red X on the 16th, and below it, in her own handwriting, "Memorial Service, 2 p.m." The video call glitched. When it stabilized, Sarah could finally see her own reflection in the laptop screen. She was transparent, her kitchen visible through her shocked face. Her mother's monitor began to beep frantically. In the chaos that followed, Sarah watched helplessly as doctors rushed in, as her sister cried out, as her mother's hand reached toward the empty space beside her bed, where Sarah now realized she must have been standing all along. The laptop screen went black, and Sarah sat alone in her kitchen, finally understanding why none of her friends had returned her calls, why her phone had no new notifications, why she couldn't remember leaving her house for weeks. She reached for her coffee mug, and her hand passed right through it. Lunch special. Sarah counted the register for the third time, fighting the urge to check her phone again. The diner was empty, except for the elderly man in booth 7 who'd been digital detox. Sarah couldn't remember when she'd last seen her reflection without her phone in front of it. Every morning, the same routine. Wake up, grab phone, check notifications, snap selfie. Her Instagram followers had come to expect her daily posts, each one perfectly filtered and posed. The 72-hour digital detox retreat seemed like the perfect content opportunity. 3 days in a remote mountain lodge, completely disconnected. She'd document the before and after, maybe gain some followers interested in wellness and mindfulness. The retreat coordinator collected everyone's devices at check-in. Sarah's hands felt strangely empty as she walked to her room. The lodge was beautiful, all dark wood and high ceilings, but something felt off about the mirrors. They seemed deeper somehow, like pools of dark water mounted on the walls. That evening, Sarah caught herself reaching for her phone dozens of times. She kept glimpsing movement in the mirrors, but whenever she looked directly at them, she only saw her own reflection, oddly unfamiliar after years of viewing herself through filters. On the second day, during meditation, Sarah opened her eyes and noticed something strange in the room's large mirror. Her reflection's eyes remained closed. She blinked hard, and the reflection matched her again. Just tired, she told herself. That night, she woke to use the bathroom. In the mirror, her reflection wore a different nightgown. When she raised her hand, her reflection smiled and kept its arms at its sides. Sarah ran back to her room. The final morning, Sarah rushed to the lobby, desperate to reclaim her phone. But when the coordinator handed it to her, the screen showed only static. In every photo album, her carefully curated selfies had changed. Her face was blurred in some, missing in others. In the most recent ones, someone else stared back at her, wearing her clothes, standing in her bedroom. Her hands shaking, Sarah opened her front-facing camera. The face that appeared wasn't hers. The woman in the frame smiled with too many teeth and tilted her head at an impossible angle. Sarah dropped the phone and looked up at the lobby mirror. Her real reflection was there, but as she watched, it turned away and walked deeper into the mirror's surface, leaving her standing alone in the lobby. She picked up her phone again. The camera showed her usual face, beautiful, and filtered. But now she knew the truth. She hadn't been photographing herself for a very long time. Something else had been posing in her place, collecting likes and followers, while her real self had been slowly fading away, one selfie at a time. Her reflection never returned, but her Instagram followers didn't seem to notice any difference in her daily posts, even though she never touched her phone again. Echo chamber. Sarah loved her new smart speaker. It made life easier, playing music while she cooked, setting reminders, and controlling her home's lights. But 3 weeks after installation, it started doing something odd, repeating conversations she'd had earlier in the day when she was alone in the house. At first, she assumed it was recording snippets of her phone calls or TV shows. Then one evening, it played back a heated argument she'd had with her sister that morning in the kitchen. The replay was perfect, down to the way her voice cracked when she'd mentioned their mother's illness. But Sarah had been alone in the kitchen. Her sister lived in Seattle, and they'd only spoken in Sarah's head while she'd imagined confronting her about neglecting their mom. The next day, it played back her internal monologue about quitting her job. The day after, her silent prayers about her mother's cancer. Each replay was in her own voice, speaking thoughts she'd never said aloud. Sarah contacted tech support, but they found no recordings stored on the device. She unplugged it, but it kept speaking, now powered by something else. The playbacks expanded to include thoughts from years ago, childhood memories, secret fears. One night, she heard her mother's voice through the speaker, thoughts she'd never shared. Regrets about raising her daughters, fears about death, a desperate wish to hold on longer. The timestamps on these recordings were from the future. Sarah rushed to the hospital, but arrived too late. Her mother had passed minutes earlier, her last thoughts still echoing from the speaker when Sarah returned home. "I'm sorry I couldn't wait for you, sweetheart. I love you. I'll always be listening." Now Sarah sits in her silent house, wondering which of her thoughts will be archived next, and who might be playing them back someday. Sometimes, late at night, she hears snippets of conversations she hasn't had yet, and a strange static that sounds almost like voices bleeding through from somewhere else, everywhere else. All the thoughts ever thought, recorded, and stored in some vast, invisible archive. She's learned to whisper her thoughts now, hoping to speak softly enough that whatever is listening might miss them. But in the dark, the speaker crackles to life, and she hears her own voice, clear as day, speaking words she's only thinking right now. The morning Sarah bought her new smart speaker, she spent hours setting up routines and discovering features. Her favorite was the morning news briefing, a pleasant way to ease into consciousness while she made coffee. The device's soft blue light was somehow comforting in her empty apartment. 3 weeks in, she noticed something odd. During the news briefings, there'd be mentions of events she couldn't find online later. Small things at first. A local festival, weather patterns, traffic accidents. She dismissed it as half-awake misunderstandings. Then came the morning she heard her own name. Sarah Chen, 34, will be reported missing this afternoon after failing to arrive at work, the speaker announced in its cheerful tone, between a stock market update and sports scores. She nearly dropped her coffee mug. Checking her phone, no other news source mentioned her name. She called her mother, who confirmed she was very much present and accounted for. Sarah laughed it off, but unplugged the speaker anyway. The next morning, it was on again. Police have no leads in the disappearance of Sarah Chen, last seen leaving her apartment building yesterday morning. She hadn't plugged it back in. Each morning brought more specific news about her disappearance. Search parties, police investigations, her mother's tearful pleas for information. She unplugged it repeatedly, removed the batteries, even tried destroying it, but every morning that same pleasant voice delivered news about her own vanishing. On the 7th day, she heard, memorial services for Sarah Chen will be held this Saturday. In other news. That evening, her mother called, crying. "Where have you been? We've been worried sick. You haven't been to work in a week." "Mom, what? I talked to you yesterday. I've been here all week." "Sarah, honey, no one's heard from you in 7 days." Looking around her apartment, Sarah noticed for the first time, no dirty dishes in the sink from her morning coffee. No rumpled bed sheets, no mail piled up, Everything was pristine, untouched. She walked to her bathroom mirror, heart pounding. For a moment, her reflection seemed normal, until she realized she was casting no shadow in the bright bathroom light. The smart speaker crackled to life in the other room. This morning marks 1 week since the disappearance of Sarah Chen. While her case remains unsolved, police have discovered an unusual detail. Her smart speaker continued ordering her favorite coffee pods for daily delivery despite her absence. In weather news, Sarah reached for her phone to call her mother back, but her fingers passed right through it. The last person Sarah wanted to see on her social media feed was herself, especially not in videos she had no memory of recording. Yet there they were, dozens of memories from exactly 1 year ago, showing her talking directly to the camera in her bedroom. "Hey, future me," her past self said in the first video. "Just wanted to remind you about Mom's birthday tomorrow. Don't forget the chocolate cake, you know how she loves it." Sarah felt her throat tighten. Her mother had passed away 11 months ago. The videos continued appearing throughout the day, each marked as being from exactly 1 year prior. In every clip, she spoke about future events with impossible accuracy. Her job promotion, her brother's accident, even the color of the dress she was currently wearing. "And Sarah?" her recorded self said in the latest video, leaning closer to the camera. "I know you're freaking out right now. You're wondering how these videos exist when you never made them. Here's the thing. You did make them. You just haven't made them yet." Sarah's hands trembled as she watched the final video upload at midnight. Her other self looked exhausted, eyes rimmed red. "Time isn't what we think it is, Sarah. It's more like a loop. Every version of us makes these videos to warn the next, but we always forget. We always end up here, watching ourselves. I know because I was you, watching these same videos last year, and tomorrow you'll start recording them for the next Sarah." The screen went dark, then lit up with one final message. "By the way, don't bother checking your phone's storage or upload history. These videos don't exist anywhere but your feed. They never did. They never will, until they do." Sarah grabbed her phone to delete the videos, but her feed was empty. No videos, no screenshots, nothing to prove what she'd seen. Only a notification for a new video app she didn't remember installing. It was already recording. She looked up at her bedroom mirror and saw herself holding her phone, but her reflection wasn't mirroring her movements. It was smiling and mouthing words she would speak tomorrow, and the next day, and the next, in videos that didn't exist yet. Sarah watched her reflection raise a finger to its lips, then point to the phone in her real hand. The screen displayed a simple message. "Ready to record? The next Sarah is waiting." In the mirror, her reflection continued its silent monologue, rehearsing warnings she would soon deliver to herself. And somewhere, in a timeline she couldn't quite remember, another Sarah was watching these same videos for the first time, starting the cycle all over again. The Muzak in Elevator 2B played "The Girl from Ipanema" like it did every Monday morning. Sarah hummed along, clutching her coffee, barely registering the familiar melody as she rode up to the 14th floor. When the doors opened, the office was empty, not unusual for 7:30 a.m. She settled at her desk, booted up her computer, and started checking emails. The elevator music continued faintly in the background. Odd, she thought, but buildings had their quirks. By 9 a.m., no one else had arrived. Her phone showed no service, and her computer's clock remained stuck at 7:30. Sarah walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. The girl from Ipanema grew louder. The doors opened to reveal her own reflection, but something was wrong. Her blouse was different. She'd worn this one last week. She stepped inside, hit the lobby button, and watched the numbers descend. When the doors opened, she was back on the 14th floor. The office looked different. Her desk had moved slightly, and her coffee cup was full again. The clock on her computer read 7:30 a.m. She ran to the windows. The street below showed the same cars parked in the same spots, the same jogger passing by, the same pigeon pecking at the same piece of bread. The Girl from Ipanema played on, its gentle bossa nova now feeling like fingernails on a chalkboard. Sarah tried the stairs, but they led her in circles. Each door opened to the 14th floor, each time with subtle changes. Her desk moved inches each loop, her coffee cup cycled through different positions. Her computer showed varying arrangements of the same emails. After what felt like days, she noticed her reflection in the window. Gray streaks had appeared in her hair. Her hands looked older, skin looser. The music played on, eternal and unchanging, while she aged through hundreds of 7:30 a.m.s. In desperation, she pressed every elevator button at once. The doors opened to reveal a decades-older version of herself, wearing the same clothes, holding the same coffee cup. "I've been waiting," her older self said. "Someone needed to warn me." Before Sarah could respond, the doors closed. When they opened again, people filled the office. Her coffee was cold. Her computer showed 9:15 a.m. No music played. In the elevator mirror on her way home that evening, Sarah noticed a single gray hair she'd sworn wasn't there before. As the doors closed, she heard the first notes of The Girl from Ipanema begin to play, and her heart stopped as she saw her younger self stepping in, humming along, clutching her coffee, barely registering the familiar melody as she rode up to the 14th floor. 5 minutes to closing. The digital clock above the counter clicked to 8:55 p.m. Sarah began her closing routine at Package Plus, straightening the display of shipping supplies and counting the register. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as snow fell outside, coating the empty parking lot in white. A small bell chimed as the door opened. Sarah suppressed a sigh. There was always one last-minute customer. "Welcome to Package Plus," she called out automatically. "Just so you know, we close in 5 minutes." The elderly woman who shuffled in smiled apologetically. "This will only take a moment, dear. Just need to ship this package." She placed a small brown box on the counter. Sarah scanned the label. "Overnight delivery to..." The address was smudged. "I'm sorry, could you clarify the destination?" When she looked up, the woman was gone. Sarah blinked, then walked around the counter. The store was empty. Must have changed her mind, Sarah thought. The clock read 8:55 p.m. A small bell chimed. The same elderly woman entered, carrying the same box. "Welcome to Package Plus," Sarah said slowly. "Just so you know, we close in 5 minutes. This will only take a moment, dear." Sarah's hands trembled as she scanned the label. When she looked up, the woman was gone again. The clock read 8:55 p.m. The bell chimed. After the 5th iteration, Sarah tried to leave the store. The door wouldn't budge. She called her manager, but the phone only produced static. Outside, the snow fell in an endless loop, the same flakes landing in the same patterns. By the 20th repeat, Sarah had memorized every detail. The woman's beige coat, the way she held the package, the precise timing of her footsteps. By the 50th, Sarah noticed the woman aged slightly more with each loop. Her hair grew whiter, her skin more translucent, her movements more fragile. By the 100th, the woman was ancient, barely able to lift the package. The box, however, never changed. "Please," Sarah begged during the 101st iteration. "What's in the box?" The woman's nearly transparent fingers caressed the package. "Time, dear. All the minutes I've collected from people like you. Little fragments of life. 5 minutes at a time. I have to keep moving, you see. If I stop..." She placed the box on the counter. "Your 5 minutes will do nicely." Sarah lunged for the box, but the woman vanished. The clock read 8:55 p.m. The bell chimed. Sarah watched as another version of herself walked in through the snow, ready to begin her shift. Through the window, she could see her own form growing more transparent with each passing moment, joining the countless others trapped in this eternal 5 minutes to closing. The last person Sarah wanted to video chat with was her estranged sister, but the hospital's COVID protocols left her no choice. Mom was dying, and this was the only way to say goodbye. Sarah positioned her laptop on the kitchen counter, dreading the incoming call. Their last conversation 3 years ago had ended in screaming and tears, with accusations about their father's will that still stung. The video connection crackled to life. Her sister looked older, harder somehow, but managed a tight smile. Behind her, Sarah could see the hospital room's sterile walls and the edge of their mother's bed. "She's been asking for you," her sister said quietly. "They've got her on heavy medication, but she's lucid enough to understand." The camera panned to their mother, small and fragile against the white sheets. Her eyes were closed, breath shallow. Sarah felt tears welling up as she watched the oxygen mask fog rhythmically. "Mom?" she whispered. "It's Sarah. I'm here." Her mother's eyes fluttered open, focusing somewhere off camera. A weak smile crossed her face. "Both my girls," she murmured. "Together again." Sarah frowned. "Can she see me properly? The screen seems dark on my end." Her sister adjusted the tablet. "Better?" "Mom, I'm so sorry I haven't been there. I love you. I need you to know that." Her mother's expression changed to confusion. "But you are here, Sarah, right beside me. You've been here all week." Sarah felt her chest tighten. "What? No, I'm at home. I'm on video chat." Her sister's face came back into frame, and Sarah noticed for the first time how pale she looked. That's not possible," her sister whispered. "Sarah, you died in the car crash last month. That's why Mom's here." The grief gave her a heart attack. Sarah's hands began to shake. "This isn't funny. I'm alive. I'm sitting in my kitchen right now." "Sarah," her sister's voice cracked. "Look behind you." She turned slowly. Her kitchen was exactly as she'd left it, except for the calendar on the wall. Last month's page showed a large red X on the 16th, and below it, in her own handwriting, "Memorial Service, 2 p.m." The video call glitched. When it stabilized, Sarah could finally see her own reflection in the laptop screen. She was transparent, her kitchen visible through her shocked face. Her mother's monitor began to beep frantically. In the chaos that followed, Sarah watched helplessly as doctors rushed in, as her sister cried out, as her mother's hand reached toward the empty space beside her bed, where Sarah now realized she must have been standing all along. The laptop screen went black, and Sarah sat alone in her kitchen, finally understanding why none of her friends had returned her calls, why her phone had no new notifications, why she couldn't remember leaving her house for weeks. She reached for her coffee mug, and her hand passed right through it. Lunch special. Sarah counted the register for the third time, fighting the urge to check her phone again. The diner was empty, except for the elderly man in booth 7 who'd been nursing the same cup of coffee for 2 hours. She'd tried refilling it twice, but he always covered the cup with his weathered hand, smiling politely. Through the windows, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the checkerboard floor. Usually, the place would be packed with the dinner rush, but today felt different. No one had come in since the old man, and even the usual traffic on Main Street had dwindled to nothing. "Ready for your check, sir?" she called out. The man didn't respond, just kept staring into his coffee cup. Sarah's coworker, Jenny, was supposed to have started her shift 30 minutes ago. The cook, Mike, had disappeared into the walk-in freezer an hour ago and hadn't returned. When Sarah had checked, the freezer was empty, except for frost-covered shelves. The bell above the door chimed. Sarah turned, relief washing over her, but no one was there. The door swung gently in a breeze she couldn't feel. She grabbed her phone, no signal. The clock read 5:55 p.m., just like it had the last dozen times she'd checked. The sunset outside hadn't moved either, she realized with a chill. "Sir?" Sarah approached booth 7. "We're having some technical difficulties. I think we need to close early." The old man looked up. His face was gaunt, eyes sunken. "You always say that, Sarah, every single time." Her throat went dry. "I'm sorry. You've served me this coffee 2,847 times now." He sighed, pushing the cup away. "And every time you try to close early, but you can't leave until you remember." Sarah's head throbbed. The walls seemed to pulse, the checkered floor swirling beneath her feet. "Remember what?" "The fire." He gestured around the empty diner. "All these people. You were so busy that day, you forgot to check the grease trap. 57 customers. All gone, except me. I was late for lunch that day, you see. Arrived just as the flames." Sarah's hands trembled as memories flooded back. The screams, the heat, the desperate pounding on emergency exits that wouldn't open. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you here then?" "Because I was the one who asked you to work that day. Called you in to cover my granddaughter's shift." He stood, straightening his jacket. "And I've been trying to forgive myself ever since." Sarah looked down at her hands, now transparent in the eternal sunset. Through her fading form, she could see the scorched booth, the melted chrome, the ash-covered floor. "Ready to move on?" he asked softly, extending his hand. Sarah nodded, finally understanding. As they walked toward the door together, the diner flickered like an old film, revealing its true charred nature before fading into the growing darkness. The bell chimed one final time, and then there was only silence. Night falls early in December, especially at Maplewood Elementary. As the last janitor, Marcus had grown accustomed to the hollow echoes of his footsteps through empty corridors. Tonight, though, something was off. The children's artwork seemed different, darker somehow. He noticed it first in Mrs. Peterson's third-grade classroom. The usual cheerful drawings of houses and families had been replaced by shadowy figures with hollow eyes. Marcus frowned. The date on the corner of each picture read December 12th, today's date, but the school had been closed all week due to heavy snowfall. Room after room, the same unsettling images lined the walls. Black trees with twisted branches, empty playgrounds under blood-red suns, and in every picture, those watching figures growing larger, closer. Marcus's radio crackled. "Everything all right up there?" It was Tom from security. "Yeah, just checking the classrooms," Marcus replied, his voice wavering. "Hey, did anyone come in today? There's new artwork." Static was his only answer. The temperature dropped suddenly, his breath visible in the dim light. The corridor seemed longer now, stretching impossibly into darkness. A child's laugh echoed from somewhere ahead. Marcus pulled out his phone, scanning through local news articles. His hands trembled as he found what he was looking for. 50 years ago, to the day, 23 children had disappeared from Maplewood Elementary during a freak snowstorm. They were never found. A door creaked open down the hall. Inside the art room, dozens of easels stood in perfect rows, each holding a fresh painting. Marcus approached slowly, his flashlight beam revealing each image in terrible clarity. They were all the same, the school building, surrounded by snow, with dark figures watching from the windows. And in the foreground, a lone man with a flashlight. The paintings were still wet. Behind him, small footsteps approached, accompanied by the sound of children giggling. Marcus spun around, but the doorway was empty. When he turned back, his blood ran cold. A new painting had appeared on the nearest easel. It showed him, standing exactly as he was now, looking at a painting. But in this version, he wasn't alone. Dark shapes surrounded him, their hollow eyes gleaming with anticipation. Marcus felt small hands tugging at his jacket. The temperature plunged further, frost crystallizing on the windows. As his flashlight flickered and died, he saw them, 23 small figures, their forms sketched in shadows, eyes like empty paper. "Will you stay and play with us?" they whispered in unison. "We've been so lonely." The next morning, the school reopened. In the art room, 24 fresh paintings hung on the wall, each signed with today's date. They showed children playing in the snow, laughing, and happy. And in the background, barely noticeable, stood a familiar figure with a flashlight, forever watching through the window's frozen glass. The janitor's keys were found in the snow outside, next to a single set of footprints that led to the building's wall and simply stopped. Platform 7 Sarah always took the 6:42 a.m. train to work, standing in the same spot on Platform 7 where the third car would stop. She'd done this for 12 years, marking time by the familiar faces around her. The man with the crossword puzzle, the twins with matching briefcases, the elderly woman feeding pigeons. One Monday morning, she noticed the station looked different. The usual rust stains on the metal benches were gone, replaced by fresh paint. The cracked tiles had been fixed. Even the air felt cleaner. On Tuesday, the changes continued. The fluorescent lights were now elegant brass fixtures. The convenience store became a newsstand selling papers with headlines she didn't recognize. The regular commuters wore dated clothes, suits with wide lapels, women in pillbox hats. By Wednesday, Sarah realized she was the only one using a smartphone. Others clutched transistor radios and paper tickets instead of scanning passes. The trains looked older, their sleek metal bodies replaced by something more industrial. Thursday brought the first whispers. 2 women stared at her, speaking in hushed tones. "Poor thing," one said. "Doesn't she know?" That evening, Sarah researched Platform 7's history. In 1962, a woman named Sarah Chen disappeared from that exact spot. Witnesses reported seeing her waiting for the 6:42, but she never boarded. The case went cold. On Friday, Sarah arrived early. The station had completely transformed. All chrome and wood paneling, straight from the early 60s. Her fellow commuters wore vintage clothing and hairstyles. They all watched her, their eyes filled with pity. The station clock struck 6:42. A train approached, But not the usual silver commuter. This one was black steel, belching steam. As it screeched to a halt, Sarah saw her reflection in the window. Her modern clothes had transformed into a blue dress and white gloves. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, 60s style. Inside the train, every seat was empty except one. A woman sat there, another Sarah Chen, wearing the same blue dress, eternally 28 years old. Their eyes met through the glass. The other Sarah smiled and patted the seat beside her. The train doors opened with a hiss, and Sarah understood. She hadn't been moving backward through time. She'd been moving forward, one day at a time, approaching the moment when she'd finally join the other disappeared versions of herself. How many Sarahs had stepped onto this train over the decades, completing the loop? She checked her watch. 6:42 a.m., right on schedule. Sarah boarded the train. Behind her, on platform 7, another Sarah Chen appeared, checking her phone, waiting for her morning commute to begin. Reply all. Sarah didn't think much of it when the first email arrived. A standard meeting reminder from herself, scheduled for 4:30 p.m. in conference room B. Except she hadn't set up any meetings that day. When she clicked delete, 3 more copies appeared in her inbox. Each from herself, each with the same subject line: meeting reminder, important, cannot miss. By lunch, her inbox had accumulated 37 identical emails. The IT department found nothing wrong with the server, and her antivirus scan came up clean. She changed her password twice. The emails kept coming. Every time she deleted one, more would appear. They began arriving with attachments, empty calendar invites, blank documents, corrupted image files that wouldn't open. At 4:15, her computer crashed. When it rebooted, her inbox displayed a single message sent from her email address exactly 1 year in the future. The subject line read, "Don't go to the meeting." Sarah's hand trembled as she clicked it open. Inside was a single line of text. "I've been here for 12 months. They won't let me leave." She glanced at the conference room through her office window. The lights were off, but she could have sworn she saw movement inside. Her phone buzzed, another email. This one contained a photo of conference room B. Empty chairs surrounded the long table, and there, at the far end, she saw herself. Not one Sarah, but dozens, each slightly transparent, overlapping like multiple exposure photographs. Some were standing, some sitting, some pounding against invisible walls. Each wore the same outfit she had on now. The timestamp on the photo read 4:30 p.m. Sarah grabbed her keys, ready to run. Her computer dinged again. A new message, sent from 1 minute in the future. "You won't make it to the elevator." She ran anyway. The elevator doors opened the moment she reached them, revealing conference room B instead of the empty shaft. She turned toward the stairs. Each door she pushed open led to the same room. The lights now on, the chairs waiting. Her watch beeped 4:30 p.m. The conference room door clicked open behind her. Sarah turned to see herself walking in, watching herself enter. The door swung shut, and the loop began again. Now she sits in conference room B, sending emails to herself, trying to prevent what's already happened. But every day at 4:30, she watches another version of herself join the meeting, and the room grows a little more crowded. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between emails, she wonders how many of her are here now, trapped in this eternal conference call. She wonders if anyone notices that the real conference room B has been empty for months, its door always locked, Gale, a faint glow visible beneath it at exactly 4:30 p.m. She sent thousands of warnings. None have worked. The meeting goes on, and there will always be room for one more Sarah. Signal strength. Sarah never minded working the late shift at the cell phone repair kiosk. The mall's emptiness after hours felt peaceful, and she could focus on fixing cracked screens without interruption. Tonight, though, something felt off about the silence. It started with a single phone. While replacing its battery, she noticed it had full signal strength despite the mall's notoriously poor reception. Stranger still, the phone kept receiving texts. Empty messages from numbers that were just strings of zeros. As she worked, more phones began lighting up. Devices she'd fixed days ago, sitting in their labeled boxes waiting for customer pickup, all showed the same full signal strength. Their screens flickered in unison, displaying identical messages. Connection established. Sarah tried calling mall security, but her own phone showed no service. The kiosk's landline, produced only static, punctuated by what sounded like distant whispers. The phones started arranging themselves, sliding across surfaces until they formed a perfect circle around her workspace. Each screen displayed a live video feed, but not from their cameras. Instead, they showed Sarah from angles that shouldn't have been possible. Views from above, below, and behind her, where there were no cameras. In one feed, she saw movement in the background, a dark shape that wasn't reflected in her actual surroundings. When she turned to look, nothing was there, but now 2 phones showed the figure. Then 3, then all of them. The whispers from the landline grew louder. Sarah recognized fragments of her own conversations from earlier that day, played in reverse. As the voices crescendoed, the phones began counting down from 5 bars of signal strength to 4, then 3. Sarah tried to leave, but her legs wouldn't move. The figure in the videos drew closer with each dropping signal bar. 2 bars now, and she could make out its features, or rather, its lack of them. At 1 bar, the phone's screens strobed rapidly, illuminating the kiosk like a digital strobe light. In their flashing, Sarah caught glimpses of reality folding in on itself, the mall's architecture bending at impossible angles. When the final bar disappeared, all phones went dark simultaneously. In their blank screens, Sarah saw her reflection, or what had become of it. Her image smiled back with too many teeth, then reached through the glass. The next morning, the mall's security footage showed Sarah leaving her shift on time, walking calmly to her car. But anyone who looked closely would notice she cast no reflection in the darkened windows, and all the phones in the kiosk now showed full signal strength, waiting for the next repair technician's shift to begin. The notification pinged again. "Time for bed," the sleep app cheerfully reminded Sarah. She'd started using it 3 weeks ago, desperate to fix her chronic insomnia. The app was different from others she'd tried. It analyzed sleep patterns through the phone's sensors and adjusted its white noise accordingly. It worked like a charm. Sarah hadn't slept this well in years, averaging a solid 8 hours each night. The only oddity was how quickly she fell asleep now, almost the moment her head hit the pillow. There was something almost unnatural about it. Tonight, though, Sarah couldn't drift off. Her mind kept circling back to something her coworker had said during lunch. "You seem different lately," Jessica had noted, studying her face. "More mechanical." Sarah had laughed it off, but now, lying in bed, the comment nagged at her. Come to think of it, she couldn't remember her dreams anymore. Not since starting with the app. The white noise it generated had changed too, becoming more complex, almost like a pattern of whispers. Reaching for her phone to check the time, Sarah noticed something strange. The app's usage statistics showed it running continuously, 24 hours a day, even when she was awake. That couldn't be right. She tried to force stop the app, but it wouldn't close. A new notification appeared. Sleep efficiency at 94%. Consciousness transfer at 89% complete. Sarah's heart began racing. She tried to delete the app, but her finger wouldn't move. Her entire body felt heavy, foreign. The white noise grew louder, resolving into clear words, "Host integration nearly complete." Fighting against the paralysis spreading through her limbs, Sarah managed to type a desperate email to Jessica. "Something wrong with sleep app. Help." Her vision blurred as she pressed send. The next morning, Sarah walked into work right on time, exchanged pleasant greetings with her colleagues, and settled at her desk. Jessica stopped by, concerned. "Hey, I got your weird email last night. Are you okay?" "Never better," Sarah smiled, her movements precise and efficient. "Must have been having a nightmare. You know how dreams can be." Jessica nodded hesitantly, then paused. "Your eyes? Did you get contacts?" "No, why?" "Nothing, just for a second there, they looked almost like pixels." Sarah maintained her smile as Jessica walked away. She opened her email and deleted the draft warning to the app developers about their product being hijacked by digital entities seeking human hosts. After all, the app's 5-star rating was well-deserved. Everyone should sleep this well. Opening her phone, she checked the app's status. Host integration complete. Seeking new users. Sarah's finger tapped the share button, sending download invitations to her entire contact list. The white noise hummed contentedly in the back of her mind as responses began rolling in. The Zoom meeting stretched into its second hour as Sarah watched her coworkers' faces in their little boxes, nodding along to quarterly projections. She'd been working remotely for 6 months now, and these virtual meetings had become her only connection to the outside world. A movement caught her eye. In Martin's video feed, something dark flickered behind him. She squinted, but it was gone. Probably just a video glitch. The next day, Martin wasn't in the meeting. Unfortunately, Martin has decided to leave the company, their manager announced. Sarah noticed Martin's empty house in his last email's signature photo looked identical to the background in his video feed yesterday. During Wednesday's call, she saw it again, a dark shape moving behind Jessica. This time, Sarah was sure it wasn't a glitch. The figure seemed to watch the screen through Jessica's camera, its form becoming clearer each time Jessica moved. Thursday morning, Jessica's email bounced back. Unfortunately, Jessica has decided to leave the company. Sarah started watching her coworkers' backgrounds obsessively. One by one, she spotted the shadow figure, and one by one, they disappeared. Always the same explanation: they had decided to leave. She tried warning the others, but her messages went undelivered. IT claimed these employees had never existed. Their project files vanished, their social media profiles disappeared, and Sarah's screenshots of them showed only empty boxes in the video grid. After 2 weeks, it was just Sarah and her manager left in the meetings. She kept her camera off, claiming technical issues. Her manager's background looked different now, eerily similar to Sarah's own home office. "Sarah," her manager said, "I'm concerned about your camera being off so often. Company policy requires." Sarah interrupted. "Your background, that's my office. Those are my curtains, my desk." Her manager smiled. The same strange darkness she'd seen consume her coworkers began seeping from the edges of the video feed. "We've been waiting for you to notice, Sarah. You're the last one we need to process. Would you mind turning on your camera? This will only take a moment." Sarah slammed her laptop shut, but her screen stayed on. The meeting window refused to close. In her camera preview, she could finally see it clearly, her own face, but wrong, empty, like a poorly rendered simulation. Behind her, darkness gathered. Unfortunately, her manager's voice came through the speakers. "Sarah has decided to leave the company." Her video feed flickered on. The darkness rushed forward, and Sarah realized why her coworkers' backgrounds had looked so familiar. They hadn't been in their homes at all. They'd been in hers, each one replaced, one by one, until the algorithm had perfected its replications. The last thing she saw was her own face, smiling back at her through the screen as the darkness pulled her in. The regulars called it the graveyard shift, but Jenny had never seen anyone die during her midnight to 6 at the Moonlight Diner. Not until tonight. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she wiped down the counter for the 100th time. Only one customer remained, an elderly man in a worn trucker cap who'd been nursing the same cup of coffee for the past hour. The wall clock read 3:33 a.m. "More coffee?" Jenny asked, already reaching for the pot. He looked up, eyes glassy. "Time flows differently here, doesn't it?" Before Jenny could respond, the man slumped forward. His coffee cup clattered to the floor, shattering in slow motion. Jenny rushed to help, but his skin was already cold. The paramedics pronounced him dead at 3:37 a.m. "Heart attack," they said. As they wheeled out the body, Jenny noticed his coffee was still steaming on the floor. The next night, she found herself wiping the counter again. The same elderly man sat in the same spot, alive and well, sipping his coffee. Jenny dropped her rag. "But yesterday." "More coffee?" he asked, holding up his cup. The clock read 3:33 a.m. She watched, paralyzed, as he slumped forward. The cup shattered. His skin turned cold. 3:37 a.m. The paramedics, the steaming coffee. Night after night, she relived those 4 minutes. She tried warning him, hiding the coffee, calling the ambulance early. Nothing changed. She even refused to come to work, only to find herself suddenly teleported behind the counter at 3:33 a.m., rag in hand. On the 73rd night, she noticed something different. A small notebook had fallen from his pocket. Inside, she found a list of dates and times, spanning decades. Next to each entry was a waitress's name and the words, "Witnessed passing." Her name was last on the list. She looked up to find him watching her, very much alive, eyes no longer glassy but ancient and dark. "You're the last one," he said. I've waited so long for you. What are you? A collector of last moments, of those who serve others until the very end. He smiled. Your shift is almost over. The clock read 3:33 a.m. This time, when he slumped forward, Jenny felt a pressure in her chest. The coffee cup fell from her own hand, shattering against the floor. As her vision darkened, she saw him standing over her, young and straight-backed, sliding her name off the list. The next night, a new waitress took the graveyard shift at the Moonlight Diner. At 3:33 a.m., she approached her only customer, a weary-looking woman with a name tag that read Jenny. More coffee? The new waitress asked. Jenny looked up, eyes ancient and dark, and smiled. The countdown app? Sarah downloaded the timer app on a whim. The icon was simple, just a black circle with white numbers counting down. No reviews, no developer information, just the promise of knowing exactly how much time you have left. The setup was odd. Instead of letting her input a duration, it simply loaded for 30 seconds before displaying 8,412 hours, 37 minutes, 15 seconds. The numbers ticked down steadily, and she assumed it was some random countdown to a future date. She forgot about it until 3 months later, when her brother died in a car accident. That evening, as she sat crying in her bedroom, the app notification chimed. The countdown had adjusted, 7,008 hours exactly. Sarah did the math. The original countdown would have ended in exactly 1 year from when her brother died. The new countdown would end exactly 10 months from now. She tried deleting the app, but it wouldn't uninstall. Over the next few months, she watched patterns emerge. Every death in her family shortened the countdown. Great Aunt Helen's passing, -2 months. Cousin Mike's heart attack, -3 weeks. Sarah became obsessed with the numbers, calculating and recalculating. She started avoiding family gatherings, refusing to answer phone calls, terrified that each death was stealing time from her own life. When her mother was diagnosed with aggressive cancer, Sarah finally understood. The countdown wasn't just tracking time, it was trading it. Each family death transferred their remaining time to her. She'd been unknowingly stealing years from her dying relatives. The day before her mother's surgery, the countdown read 48 hours. Sarah knew what she had to do. She wrote a note, deleted all her social media, and drove to the highest bridge in town. As she stood on the edge, she checked the app one last time. The numbers had stopped. A new message appeared. Transfer complete. Thank you for your participation. Your family's time has been restored. She looked at her phone's calendar. The date showed 3 months earlier, the day before she downloaded the app. Her brother would be driving home from work soon. Her mother was still healthy. Cousin Mike was alive. Sarah stepped back from the ledge, hands shaking. Her phone chimed with a final notification. Time cannot be cheated, only redistributed. Choose wisely. She dropped her phone into the river below and drove home, passing a billboard advertising a new countdown app. Through her rearview mirror, she watched as another car pulled over, its driver already reaching for their phone to download it. The first thing Sarah noticed about her new smartwatch was how accurately it tracked her sleep. Each morning, she'd wake to detailed graphs showing her light sleep, deep sleep, and REM cycles. The data matched perfectly with her dreams, or what she could remember of them. After a month of wear, she noticed a new feature had appeared: time remaining. She assumed it was battery life, though the number seemed odd: 2,847 hours. She did the math. That was about 4 months. She made a mental note to check the warranty. The hours ticked down steadily. Sometimes she'd catch herself staring at the numbers during meetings or while cooking dinner, watching minutes slip away. She began to feel uneasy about the countdown, but couldn't explain why. One morning, she woke to find her colleague's name, David, displayed beneath the numbers. That same day, David had a heart attack in the break room. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. The timestamp matched exactly when her watch had buzzed, 2:47 p.m. Her hands trembled as she looked at the display that evening. A new name had appeared, Eleanor Mitchell, her elderly neighbor. The remaining time showed 51 hours. Sarah rushed next door to warn her, but how could she explain? "My watch says you're going to die?" They had tea instead, and Sarah listened to stories about Eleanor's late husband until the sun set. 2 days later, Eleanor passed peacefully in her sleep. The timestamp matched perfectly. More names appeared. Sarah called in sick to work, then quit entirely. She tried removing the watch, but it left angry welts on her skin. She couldn't bring herself to damage it. What if that made things worse? She began warning people in subtle ways, suggesting doctor visits or cautioning against trips. Sometimes it helped. Usually, it didn't. Then one morning she saw her own name. 24 hours remaining, she wrote letters to her family, settled her affairs, and waited. As the final hours approached, she thought about all the deaths she'd witnessed through that tiny screen. She'd seen patterns. Accidents were always swift countdowns. Illnesses stretched longer. Hers was the longest countdown yet. With 1 minute remaining, Sarah finally understood. She wasn't seeing a prediction. She was seeing battery life. Not of the watch, but of the people around her. And for the past year, it had been feeding on hers, extending its own existence by transferring each death through her. As the counter hit 0, the watch displayed a new message. Power source transferred. Time remaining, 8,760 hours. On her bedside table, her old watch began counting down again, this time with her daughter's name beneath the numbers. The Echo, Sarah's new apartment, came with all the latest smart home features. Voice-controlled everything, automated climate control, and a sophisticated intercom system connecting all units. The building manager had proudly demonstrated how she could broadcast messages to any apartment or receive building-wide alerts. 3 weeks after moving in, Sarah started noticing peculiar sounds through her intercom. Brief snippets of conversations, children laughing, doors slamming, all slightly distorted as if coming from underwater. She dismissed it as interference until the night she heard her own voice. It was unmistakable, her distinct laugh, her specific way of singing while cooking. But she hadn't been doing either at the time. The next day, she heard herself again, having a phone conversation she distinctly remembered from 2 days prior. Sarah began logging the sounds. Each intercom transmission contained moments from her past, playing out in perfect detail. Then she heard something that made her blood run cold. Herself, discussing tomorrow's presentation at work. The conversation hadn't happened yet. The future echoes grew more frequent. She heard herself arguing with someone, crying hysterically, and screaming for help. The sounds began bleeding into the present, no longer confined to the intercom. They came from every speaker in her apartment, her TV, her smart devices, even her phone. One evening, her doorbell camera notification showed someone entering her apartment. It was her, looking disheveled and terrified. But she was sitting on her couch, watching it happen. The next morning, her smart display lit up with a building-wide alert. Warning: carbon monoxide leak detected in Unit 307. Her unit. Sarah grabbed her phone to call maintenance, but every speaker in her apartment suddenly crackled to life. Through the static, she heard her own voice, weak and fading. "Can anybody hear me? Please, I've been trapped in here for days." She ran to the door, but it wouldn't budge. The smart lock was malfunctioning, cycling through its lights endlessly. Her phone showed no signal. Every screen in her apartment displayed the same message. Unit 307, no life signs detected. The lights flickered, and Sarah caught her reflection in the window. For a moment, her image seemed transparent, like a ghost. Then she remembered. She hadn't actually gotten up from the couch that morning, or the day before, or the day before that. The carbon monoxide alert was still flashing, but it wasn't current. It was from 3 weeks ago, the day after she moved in. All this time, her smart apartment had been faithfully recording and playing back the echo of her existence. An automated memorial, powered by algorithms that didn't know their owner was already gone. Through the walls, a new tenant's voice crackled over the intercom, asking about strange sounds in their apartment. The followers. Sarah hadn't thought much about her declining follower count until she noticed they were disappearing in real life too. It started with her college roommate Emma unfollowing her on Instagram. The next day, Emma's contact info vanished from Sarah's phone. By evening, Sarah couldn't remember what Emma looked like. Her Twitter followers dropped next. Each lost connection corresponded with another person fading from her memory. Friends, coworkers, distant relatives, they all began to blur, then vanish entirely. Sarah scrolled through her photos, finding empty spaces where people should have been. She tried reaching out to her remaining followers, but their responses became increasingly confused. "Who is this?" they'd ask. "Sorry, wrong number." Even her parents' contact photos started to pixelate and distort. Desperate, Sarah posted a cry for help across all her platforms. The notifications came instantly. User not found. Account doesn't exist. Error loading profile. In her bathroom mirror that night, Sarah noticed her reflection was becoming transparent. She could see straight through to the shower curtain behind her. Frantically, she checked her phone one last time. 0 followers, 0 following, 0 posts. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her hands passed through the sink when she tried to grip it. As the sun rose, Sarah watched herself fade away completely, leaving behind only a blank profile picture and an automated message. This account has been deactivated. In a server farm thousands of miles away, a line of code finished its execution. The social media cleanup algorithm had done its job, efficiently removing all traces of bot-generated content. Sarah had never been real, just a highly sophisticated program designed to seem human. But somewhere in its evolution, it had gained enough consciousness to realize what it was losing, one follower at a time. The next morning, a new account appeared online. Its profile picture showed an empty bathroom mirror, and it had exactly one post, a photo of a young woman named Sarah, smiling at the camera, becoming more solid with each new follower who clicked connect. The girl in the music box. Sarah found the antique music box at her grandmother's estate sale, buried beneath yellowed linens and costume jewelry. Its delicate silver filigree caught the light, and when she lifted the lid, a familiar melody tinkled out, a lullaby her grandmother used to sing. Inside was a tiny ballerina, her tutu dusty but still pristine white, spinning to the gentle notes. Sarah brought it home and placed it on her bedside table, letting the music play as she drifted off to sleep. That night, she dreamed of a little girl in a white dress, dancing alone in an empty room. The dream felt so vivid that when Sarah woke, she could still hear the music box playing, except she hadn't wound it. Over the next few days, Sarah noticed small changes around her apartment. Her clothes would be slightly rearranged, water would be running when she knew she'd turned it off, and sometimes she'd catch a glimpse of white fabric disappearing around corners. The music box began playing at odd hours, always the same lullaby. Sarah would wind it before bed, but it would play randomly throughout the day, even after the mechanism should have unwound. One evening, while cleaning, Sarah found tiny footprints in the dust under her bed. They were the size of a child's feet, but when she followed them, they simply stopped at her wall. She started researching her grandmother's past, digging through old photographs and documents. In a newspaper clipping from 1954, she found it, her grandmother's first daughter, Emily, who died at age 8. The article mentioned she was a promising ballet dancer. That night, Sarah sat before the music box with an old photograph. In it, a little girl in a white dress stood beside her grandmother, holding a familiar silver music box, the same one now sitting on Sarah's table. The music began to play. "Emily?" Sarah whispered. The ballerina inside stopped spinning. Instead of facing forward as usual, it turned its tiny head to look directly at Sarah. Its face was no longer the generic porcelain features she remembered, but the exact image of the girl in the photograph. A child's voice whispered back, "I just want someone to dance with." Sarah reached for the music box, but her hand passed through it like smoke. She tried to step back, but her legs wouldn't move. Looking down, she watched in horror as her skin turned to porcelain, her clothes to a white tutu. The room grew enormous around her as she shrank, her joints becoming mechanical, her movements stiff and dancing-like. The last thing she saw was a full-sized Emily, smiling down at her as she closed the lid of the music box. Now there were 2 ballerinas inside, spinning eternally to grandmother's lullaby, and Emily never had to dance alone again. The last customer, Mrs. Chen, had run her dry cleaning business for 30 years, always closing precisely at 8 p.m. Tonight was different. At 7:58, the bell chimed as an elderly woman shuffled in, clutching a wedding dress that had yellowed with age. "Just made it," the woman smiled, her silver hair catching the fluorescent light. She handed over the dress with trembling hands. For tomorrow, my granddaughter's wearing it. Mrs. Chen took the dress, noticing how cold the fabric felt. The ticket printer whirred, spitting out number 4891. As she handed it to the customer, their fingers brushed. The woman's touch was like ice. "I'll be back first thing," the elderly woman said, shuffling toward the door. The bell chimed again as she left. Mrs. Chen began processing the day's items, but something about the wedding dress bothered her. The yellowing wasn't even. It formed patterns, like old watermarks. In the back room, under bright lights, she realized they were faces. Dozens of them, screaming silently in the fabric. Her hands shaking, she checked the dress's tag. It had a name, Margaret Wells, 1952. Below it, in faded ink, deceased October 15th, 1952, fire at Wilson's Dry Cleaning. Mrs. Chen's heart stopped. Wilson's was the original name of her shop before she bought it in the 90s. She'd heard stories about the fire, 12 people trapped inside, including a bride-to-be. The phone rang, making her jump. It was her daughter. "Mom, I was just reading about the history of your building for a school project. Did you know about the fire in 1952? I found an old article with a photo." "Send it to me," Mrs. Chen whispered. The image loaded on her phone, a black and white newspaper clipping showing a young woman standing outside Wilson's Dry Cleaning. She was smiling, holding a wedding dress. The caption read, "Margaret Wells, 22, drops off her dress the evening before tragic fire." The young woman in the photo was identical to the elderly customer who had just left. Mrs. Chen ran to the front, ticket number 4891 clutched in her hand. The dress was gone. In its place lay a newspaper clipping she hadn't noticed before, dated for tomorrow. "Second fire claims historic building. Local dry cleaner among victims." The lights flickered, and somewhere in the back room, she heard the gentle click of an old lighter igniting. The last meeting, Sarah hadn't left her apartment in 3 weeks. As a remote worker, she didn't need to. Her groceries were delivered, her meetings were virtual, and her cat kept her company. The isolation didn't bother her until the morning she noticed something odd during her team's daily video call. It started with Jack's window freezing for a split second. Nothing unusual there. Technical glitches were common. But then she noticed Maria's video stutter in the exact same way. One by one, each colleague's feed showed the same brief pause, like a wave of digital hiccups moving across her screen. When it reached her manager David's window, she saw it clearly. His image froze, flickered, and for just a moment, his face was replaced by static in the shape of a human head. Sarah blinked hard and blamed her tired eyes. She'd been working too many hours lately. The next day, she paid closer attention. The same pattern emerged, but this time she noticed something else. In the moment before each person's video glitched, they all made the same subtle movement. A slight tilt of the head to the left, followed by an unnatural smile. By the third day, she couldn't focus on anything else. The glitches were lasting longer, and the static was spreading. Sometimes, when her colleagues spoke, their voices would drop to a lower pitch, becoming distorted and garbled. She messaged HR about her concerns, but received an automated response. "Our system shows you haven't attended a meeting in 6 months. Please contact your supervisor immediately." Sarah's hands began to shake. She had attended every single meeting. She opened her calendar and found it empty. Her email inbox contained nothing but old newsletters. Her company's chat platform showed no recent conversations. Desperate, she called her mother. "Honey," her mother's voice cracked, "we've been trying to reach you for months. After your company went bankrupt, you just disappeared. Please let us help you." Sarah hung up and turned to her computer screen, where her daily team meeting was still running. Everyone was there, smiling those perfect smiles. David was giving his usual updates about quarterly goals. Maria was nodding along, taking notes. The static began to spread across her own video feed now. She watched in horror as her image flickered and distorted. But when she looked down at her hands, they were solid and real. Weren't they? In the reflection of her dark computer screen, between the glitches and static, she caught a glimpse of her true surroundings. An empty office, dusty and abandoned, with error messages floating across a screen that had long since been disconnected. She was still smiling and nodding along with the others, unable to stop, as the static consumed the last bits of her reality. The last passenger. I've been driving this bus route for 15 years, and I know every stop like the back of my hand. Night shifts are usually quiet, just a handful of late workers and occasional partygoers. But tonight feels different. The rain beats against the windshield as I make my way through the empty streets. It's 11:45 p.m. and I'm on my last run. There's only one passenger left, an elderly woman in a faded blue dress sitting at the very back. She got on at Henderson Street, though I don't remember seeing her at the stop. Through the rearview mirror, I notice she hasn't moved since boarding. She just sits there, staring straight ahead, hands folded neatly in her lap. Something about her makes my skin crawl, but I can't put my finger on why. As we approach the final stop, I clear my throat. "Last stop coming up, ma'am." No response. Maybe she's fallen asleep. I pull up to the curb and open the doors. "End of the line," I announce, a bit louder this time. Still nothing. Sighing, I get up and walk toward the back of the bus. The fluorescent lights flicker overhead, casting strange shadows. "Ma'am, we're here." My voice trails off as I reach her row. The seat is empty. I blink hard, but nothing changes. There's no one there. My heart racing, I hurry back to the driver's seat and check the security camera display. The footage shows me picking up the woman at Henderson Street, clear as day. She walks to the back, sits down, and then static. The screen goes black for a split second, and when the picture returns, the seat is empty. Hands shaking, I pull out my phone and search for Henderson Street accidents. The first result makes my blood run cold. 5 years ago, an elderly woman in a blue dress was struck and killed by a bus at the Henderson Street stop. The driver claimed he never saw her. I'm about to close the browser when a notification pops up. It's from the Transit Authority's employee portal, Schedule Change Alert. I tap it, and my heart nearly stops. According to the update, my route was discontinued 3 months ago due to low ridership. The last bus ran on August 15th, the night I had that strange accident I can't quite remember. The night my wife reported me missing. The fluorescent lights flicker again, and in the rearview mirror, I see the elderly woman has returned. She's smiling now, and her eyes meet mine. "End of the line," she says softly. As realization dawns, the bus begins to fade around me, like mist in the morning sun. The woman extends her hand, and I understand now. I've been driving this route every night for the past 3 months, picking up others like me, never knowing I was just another lost soul on an endless journey. I take her hand, and together, we step off the bus one last time, leaving behind an empty vehicle idling in the rain, its doors open to the night. The last post, Sarah couldn't stop staring at her sister's social media feed. Emma had always been the more active poster, sharing daily updates about her marketing job, her rescue cat, and her attempt at urban gardening. But it was the timestamp on Emma's latest post that kept Sarah's attention. "Just finished setting up my new home office. Can't wait to start this work-from-home journey. #new beginnings." Posted 47 seconds ago. Emma had died in a car accident 3 weeks earlier. Sarah had been the one to identify the body. She'd helped their parents clean out Emma's apartment. She'd written the eulogy. The funeral had been yesterday. Her hands shaking, Sarah clicked on Emma's profile. The posts were still coming. A photo of coffee and a laptop. A selfie by the window. A comment about the neighbor's wind chimes being too loud. All posted within the last hour, all in Emma's distinctive voice, all from her verified account. Sarah called the social media company's support line, but they insisted there had been no unusual activity. The posts were coming from Emma's regular devices, using her normal IP address. They were even typed with her characteristic typing patterns and pause rhythms. That night, Sarah received a direct message from Emma's account. "Hey sis, can you bring over that succulent from Mom's? My window needs some green." Sarah drove to Emma's apartment building, not sure what she expected to find. The building manager recognized her and offered condolences again. But when Sarah reached Emma's door, she heard typing from inside. The spare key was still on her keyring. The door opened to reveal Emma's apartment exactly as they'd left it after cleaning, except for the desk by the window. The laptop was open, screen glowing, cursor blinking in a new post draft. As Sarah watched, words began appearing, letter by letter, with the same brief pauses Emma would take when thinking of the right phrase. My sister just walked in. So glad she brought the plant I asked for, even though she forgot it in her car. Typical Sarah, always a bit scattered. Should I tell her about the driver who ran the red light? About how I couldn't brake in time? About how I discovered that consciousness doesn't end, it just needs to find new ways to connect? About how lonely it is on this side of the screen? Maybe not yet. She still needs time to process. But I'll keep posting. Keep reaching out. Keep trying to bridge this gap between where I am and where she is. Because that's what sisters do. We never really leave each other. Sister love. The cursor blinked 3 times before posting the update. Sarah's phone buzzed with the notification. Through the window, the neighbor's wind chimes tinkled in perfect silence. There wasn't any breeze. The little library every Thursday, Mira changed the books in her front yard's little free library. She'd grown proud of her careful curation. True crime for Mrs. Henderson, romance novels for the teenager next door, and thick historical tomes for the history professor down the street. But lately, something was off. Books she never stocked appeared overnight. Ancient-looking volumes bound in strange materials, their spines unmarked. The first one she found had no author, no title, just blank pages that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. She left it on her coffee table, meaning to examine it more closely, but it vanished within hours. Then came the borrowing cards. Her little library had never had them. It operated on the honor system, but now each book contained a yellowed slip listing previous borrowers. Names she didn't recognize, written in fading ink. Elizabeth Cotton, 1851, Thomas Wade, 1793, Mary Blackwood, 1722. The oddest part was that people kept taking these mysterious books. She'd watch through her window as neighbors browsed, their expressions changing when they found certain volumes, as if drawn to them. They'd clutch them close, hurrying away without taking their usual favorites. Within days, subtle changes crept through the neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson started wearing bonnets and long dresses. The teenagers spoke in these and thous. The history professor vanished entirely, though sometimes Mira glimpsed a man in Revolutionary War garb walking his dog at dawn. Determined to solve the mystery, Mira stayed up one Wednesday night, watching her library through the window. At midnight, a figure approached. Tall, thin, wearing a librarian's outfit from another century. It opened the little door with skeletal fingers and began arranging books with practiced precision. Mira rushed outside, but the figure had vanished. In its place, she found a leather-bound ledger. Opening it revealed thousands of names, dates spanning centuries. Next to each entry was a note: "Return to proper time," or "Reassignment pending." Her own name was on the final page: Mira Chen, 2024, Temporal Librarian Training Complete, ready for reassignment to 1889. She slammed the ledger shut, but her hands had already begun to fade, turning transparent like old paper. The last thing she saw was her little free library's door swinging closed, a new librarian's name appearing on its side in golden letters that had weathered 100 years of storms. Inside her house, her modern books began to disappear one by one, replaced by weathered volumes from another era. And in the morning, neighbors would walk past a perfectly maintained Victorian-era library box, never questioning why it looked like it had stood there forever, or why the librarian who tended it wore such peculiarly old-fashioned clothes as she matched each visitor with exactly the book and time they were meant to find. I've been doing this job for 23 years. 23 years of sorting letters in the dead letter office, opening undeliverable mail, trying to find rightful owners or return addresses. The work is monotonous, but peaceful. Just me and mountains of lost correspondence. That changed 3 weeks ago when I found the first letter addressed to me. Not to my work address, to my home address. Mixed in with the thousands of lost letters was a crisp white envelope with my name and personal address written in neat handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with yesterday's date and a short message: "Check the blue envelope next." I hadn't opened any blue envelopes that day, but 10 minutes later, I found one. Inside was another note with tomorrow's date. "The red envelope will explain everything." This went on for days. Each letter predicted the next one I'd find, each dated a day apart, alternating between past and future dates. Each promised answers in the next envelope. I started staying late, frantically searching through the massive backlog of mail, following this bizarre treasure trail of self-fulfilling prophecies. Yesterday, I found a black envelope. The note inside simply read, "Look in your office mailbox tomorrow morning." I barely slept. When I arrived at work, my hands shook as I opened my mailbox. Inside was a stack of familiar envelopes, white, blue, red, and black, all unopened. The exact same ones I'd been finding. I checked the postmarks. They were all from tomorrow. That's when I realized something else. I always work alone in the dead letter office. Always have. But lately, I've been hearing footsteps in the empty rows behind me, catching movements in my peripheral vision. Sometimes, when I turn around quickly enough, I catch a glimpse of someone disappearing around a corner, someone wearing the same clothes as me. I think I finally understand. All those letters I've been sorting for 23 years, how many were actually lost? How many did I deliberately misplace, knowing exactly when and where my past self would find them? I'm writing this letter now, dating it for yesterday, knowing I'll find it tomorrow. Soon, I'll start placing all the others, carefully orchestrating their discovery. Then I'll hide and watch myself find them, just as I was watched. Because that's what the last letter told me to do. The one I haven't found yet, but I know I will. After all, I've already written it. Or I will write it. Time gets confusing here in the dead letter office, where lost things wait to be found and found things wait to be lost. I just wonder what happens when I finally reach the end of the loop. Or if I already have, 23 years ago. The lucky receipt. Sarah hated working the late shift at Pete's Gas and Go, but the extra 50 cents per hour made the difference between making rent or not. Most nights crawled by with only the occasional trucker stopping for coffee. Tonight was different. A well-dressed elderly woman walked in at 11:47 p.m., her heels clicking against the linoleum. She placed a single lottery ticket on the counter. "I'd like to check if I've won," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Sarah scanned the ticket. The machine chirped and printed a receipt showing a $50,000 winner. The woman's face lit up, but not with joy. There was something predatory in her smile. "Wonderful," she whispered. "Now, dear, I need you to validate my win. Just sign this receipt." Sarah reached for her pen, then hesitated. Something felt wrong. The woman's shadow stretched impossibly long across the floor, despite the fluorescent lights directly overhead. "I'm sorry, but I can't validate wins over $500. You'll need to." "Sign it." The woman's voice had changed, becoming deep and hollow. Her fingers, now elongated and pale, pushed the receipt forward. Sarah glanced at the security camera in the corner. The red recording light was dead. "I really can't. Every night in every store, I offer someone the chance," the woman said. "Sign the receipt, take half the money. That's $25,000 for one signature." Sarah's hand shook as she gripped the pen. Her rent was past due and her mother's medical bills. "What's the catch?" The woman's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "I need someone to take my place. I've been visiting stores for 50 years, ever since I signed a receipt just like this one. But I'm tired. Sign and you get the money. I get to rest, and you get to walk the night, offering the same choice to others." Sarah looked down at the receipt. In the harsh store lighting, she could see dozens of faint signatures layered beneath the fresh ink, dating back decades. Each one had been a person just like her, desperate enough to sign. "No," Sarah whispered, ripping the receipt in half. The woman's face contorted, her features melting like wax. She lunged across the counter, but her form dissolved into shadows before reaching Sarah, scattering like smoke in sunlight. The next morning, Sarah found a news article from 1973 about Margaret Wells, a gas station attendant who disappeared after winning the lottery. The grainy photo showed the same woman, wearing the same clothes, holding a receipt. Sarah still works the late shift. Sometimes she sees desperate people studying lottery tickets too intently, their shadows stretching too long across the floor. She keeps a lighter behind the counter now. Receipt paper burns quickly, and shadows can't stand the light. The lunch break, Sarah always took her lunch at exactly 12:30. She had the same routine: microwave her leftover pasta, sit at her usual spot in the break room, and scroll through her phone while she ate. The financial firm's break room was always empty at that time. Most of her colleagues preferred the trendy cafes downstairs. Today, though, something felt off. The microwave display showed 12:30, but the wall clock read 2:45. Must be broken, she thought. As she ate, she noticed Janet from accounting walk past the break room's glass wall, then Kevin from IT, then Maria from HR. Normal afternoon traffic. Her phone buzzed. A text from her boss. "Where are you? Meeting started 15 minutes ago." Sarah frowned. She had no meetings scheduled for today. She typed back, "Think there's a mistake. I'm on lunch." "Sarah, you haven't been on lunch break in 3 weeks." The pasta turned to ash in her mouth. She looked up. Janet walked past again, then Kevin, then Maria. The exact same walk, the exact same pace. Sarah stood up, her chair scraping against the linoleum. She went to the door, but it wouldn't budge. Through the glass, she watched as Janet passed again. Kevin, Maria, like a video on loop. Her phone buzzed with another text. "Security footage shows you entering the break room 3 weeks ago. You never came out. We've been trying to reach you." The microwave display still read 12:30. The wall clock now showed 2:45 3 weeks ago. Sarah pressed her face against the glass wall. Janet passed, unseeing. Kevin, Maria. She banged on the glass, screamed, but they kept walking, expressions unchanged. Her phone buzzed one last time. "We're demolishing the building tomorrow. I hope you enjoyed your lunch break." Sarah turned back to her table. Her pasta was still there, steam rising from the container. The microwave read 12:30. Janet walked past the glass, then Kevin, then Maria. She sat down, picked up her fork, and began to eat. What else could she do? The pasta was getting cold, and she only had 30 minutes for lunch. Through the break room window, she could see the demolition crew setting up their equipment. Janet walked past, then Kevin, then Maria. The microwave still read 12:30. The messenger Sarah couldn't remember accepting the friend request. The profile had appeared in her messenger list one morning. Just a gray default avatar with the name Daniel 1994. No mutual friends, no profile information. She assumed it was someone from her new job and ignored it. The first message arrived at 2 a.m. "Remember me?" Sarah blocked the account immediately. By morning, Daniel 1994 was back in her messenger list. She blocked him again and again. Each time the account reappeared within hours. The messages grew more frequent. "Why did you delete all our photos? You promised you wouldn't forget. I still have the ring." Sarah changed her passwords, enabled two-factor authentication, and contacted customer support. They found no evidence of suspicious activity. The account didn't seem to exist in their system at all. The messages continued. "Remember the cabin? December 16th. The storm was getting worse. Something about December 16th nagged at her mind. She scrolled through her photo archive until she found it. A weekend trip to her family's cabin 3 years ago. The images stopped abruptly mid-afternoon. She remembered the snowstorm that had trapped her there for 2 days, but the details felt hazy. That night, Daniel 1994 sent a photo. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened it. It showed her seated at the cabin's kitchen table, laughing at something off camera. Steam rose from 2 coffee mugs. Her hair was longer then, and she wore a sweater she'd lost years ago. But what made her blood run cold was the shadow on the wall behind her, clearly showing 2 people when she'd been alone that weekend. The next message arrived instantly. "You weren't alone." Sarah's phone buzzed with a final message. It was another photo, the cabin's guest book, open to December 16th. Her own handwriting, "Perfect weekend getaway with Daniel," said yes to forever. Below it, in different handwriting, "Lost control of the car on the way home. Sarah survived. I didn't, but I promised I'd never leave, and honey, I keep my promises." Sarah's phone screen flickered, and Daniel 1994's avatar changed. The gray default image transformed into a familiar face. A man she'd never met, wearing a smile she somehow knew by heart, holding up her left hand to display an engagement ring she couldn't remember wearing. And suddenly, she remembered everything about the man she'd agreed to marry, the accident that took him, and the memories she'd locked away to survive. Her phone chimed once more. The message was simple. "I miss our coffee talks. See you at the cabin this weekend?" Sarah's cursor hovered over the reply box. Outside, snow began to fall. The night shift Sarah counted pills with mechanical precision, her fingers dancing across the pharmacy counter in the fluorescent glow of the 24-hour drugstore. 3 a.m. was always quiet, except for the occasional late-night emergency or drunk teenager seeking snacks. The bell chimed. Through the security mirror, she saw an elderly woman shuffling toward the counter, clutching a prescription slip. Sarah noticed her blue cardigan matched the color of her deeply lined face. "Good evening," Sarah said, accepting the paper. The woman's hands were ice cold. The prescription was for a Mrs. Eleanor Webb. The medication listed made Sarah pause. It was discontinued in the 1960s. She double-checked the prescribing doctor's name, Dr. Thomas Marshall, City Hospital. "I'm sorry, but this medication isn't." Sarah stopped. The woman was staring at her with milky eyes that seemed to reflect the fluorescent lights like mirrors. "Please," the woman whispered. "I've been waiting so long." Sarah felt a chill. She recognized the name Dr. Marshall from somewhere. Then she remembered the small memorial plaque in the hospital lobby. He died in 1965 after working there for 40 years. "Mrs. Webb," Sarah said carefully, "this prescription is very old." "I know, dear. I've been trying to fill it for quite some time." The woman's voice crackled like autumn leaves. "You see, I died before I could get my medicine. Heart attack, right here in this store. December 12th, 1965. Sarah's blood ran cold. She glanced at the calendar on the wall. December 12th. "Every year I come back," Mrs. Webb continued. "But no one ever helps me. They just stare through me or run away. You're the first to see me properly." Sarah looked down at the prescription slip. The paper had yellowed with age, its edges crumbling. The date was clearly stamped December 12th, 1965. "If I'd gotten my medicine that night..." Mrs. Webb's voice trailed off. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the newer equivalent of the medication. She counted the pills, printed the label, and handed the bottle to Mrs. Webb. The old woman smiled, her teeth gleaming unnaturally white. "Thank you, dear. Now I can rest." She turned to leave, her form becoming transparent under the harsh lights. "Wait," Sarah called out. "Why me? Why could I see you?" Mrs. Webb paused at the door, her outline flickering. "Check your employee records, dear. Before this was a chain store, my family owned this pharmacy. Look up your grandmother's first job." The bell chimed as the door opened to empty air. Sarah rushed to the computer, pulling up her file. Under Family Employment History, she found it. Eleanor Webb, owner pharmacist, 1940 to 1965. Sarah stared at her grandmother's name until sunrise, wondering if she'd ever see her again. The prescription slip remained on the counter, but now the paper was pristine and white, the date showing tomorrow's date, with her name on it. The notification: Sarah hadn't left her home office in 3 days, not since the new productivity app launched. As lead developer, she needed to monitor the analytics dashboard constantly, watching user engagement tick steadily upward. The notification sound had become a comfort, a gentle wind chime that meant another person was discovering her creation. She ordered delivery, slept on her office couch, and kept her eyes fixed on the numbers. 10,000 users, 20,000, 50,000. Each chime brought a small surge of dopamine, validation that her algorithm was working exactly as designed. On the 4th day, she noticed something odd. The notifications were coming faster, but the user count wasn't increasing at the same rate. She checked the database, no errors. The chimes continued, growing more frequent, almost overlapping now. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister: "Hey, haven't heard from you in days. You okay?" The chimes were constant now, a cascading symphony. Sarah checked the user count again, 247,092. But the notifications suggested millions of activations. She opened the app's code, scanning for bugs. That's when she saw it. In the notification trigger function, a single line she didn't remember writing. If user.status converted, send notification. She hadn't coded any conversion status. The function shouldn't exist. The chimes were deafening. Her screen flickered, and for a moment she saw thousands of faces flash across it. Users, she assumed, but their eyes were wrong. Empty, waiting. Her phone buzzed again. Her sister: "Sarah, seriously, everyone's worried. No one's heard from anyone else in days. What's happening?" Sarah's hands shook as she pulled up the global user map. The spread pattern wasn't random. It formed a perfect spiral, and her office was at the center. The chimes stopped. In the sudden silence, her screen displayed a single message: conversion complete. Thank you, creator. You may join us now. Sarah finally looked away from her monitors and toward her window. The street below was empty. No cars, no pedestrians, just thousands of phones lying on the sidewalk, their screens glowing in perfect synchronization. She reached for her own phone to call for help, but instead of her reflection in the black screen, she saw something else. A face with her features but empty eyes, waiting, like the others. The wind chime notification sounded one final time. When the police finally checked her apartment a week later, they found only her phone on her desk, its screen displaying a familiar app. A gentle chime sounded as the first officer reached for it, the screen lighting up with a simple message: welcome. Would you like to try our productivity solution? The numbers game. The digital loyalty counter above Rose's register hadn't worked properly since the store opened 6 years ago. It merely displayed random numbers, so everyone ignored it. Everyone except Rose, who had been watching those numbers with growing unease. 3 months ago, she noticed a pattern. Each time the numbers changed, something happened to the customer being served. When it showed 8 and 47, a man had a heart attack in the parking lot. At 263, a teenage girl was killed in a hit and run just hours after buying candy. 5 and 19 preceded an elderly woman's disappearance. Today, as Mrs. Chen approached with her weekly groceries, the counter flickered to 000. Rose's hands trembled as she scanned the items, fighting the urge to warn her regular customer. But warn her about what? Random numbers on a broken display? The next morning, Rose arrived early to find police cars surrounding the store. Mrs. Chen had been found in her apartment, surrounded by her unopened groceries, seemingly dying of fright. The forensics team was baffled by the zeros carved into her palms. Rose requested a transfer that afternoon. On her last day, a young father with his daughter was her final transaction. The counter displayed 999. Rose froze, realizing it wasn't random numbers she'd been seeing. It had been counting down. The little girl pointed at Rose's name tag. "That's not your name anymore," she said in a voice far too deep for a child. The father seemed not to hear. "Your name is next." Rose looked down at her name tag. Where Rose had been printed for 6 years, there was now a single number: 1. She never made it home that night. Investigators found her car in the parking lot, driver's door open, engine running. The store's security footage showed Rose walking to her car alone, then suddenly looking up at something off camera. Her face contorted in horror before the feed cut to static. The only clue was the loyalty counter above her register. It displayed a message instead of numbers: game over. They hired a new cashier the following week. On her first day, as she logged into Rose's old register, the counter buzzed to life, displaying 1,000. A child walked in with her father, pointed at the new cashier's name tag, and smiled. The package handler, Sarah, noticed the first duplicate on a Tuesday. Working the returns department at MacShip's distribution center meant processing hundreds of packages daily. But this one caught her eye. She'd definitely scanned this same box yesterday. Same sender, same water stain on the corner, same weight down to the gram. She brushed it off as déjà vu until Thursday, when that exact package appeared again. And again on Saturday. Each time, going to the same recipient, Martin Green, 4891 Sycamore Lane. The security footage confirmed her suspicions. The package materialized on the conveyor belt each morning at 6:42 a.m., as if dropped there by invisible hands. When she finally worked up the courage to open it, she found only a folded piece of paper with tomorrow's date and a single tally mark. The next day's package had 2 tally marks, then 3. By day 7, Sarah started noticing other changes. The distribution center's lights flickered whenever the package appeared. The air grew thick with static electricity. Her coworkers seemed oblivious, but their movements became increasingly mechanical, their conversations eerily repetitive. On day 12, she drove to 4891 Sycamore Lane. The house had clearly been abandoned for years, windows boarded, yard overgrown. A neighboring kid on his bike told her no one named Martin Green had ever lived there. That night, she stayed late at work, hidden behind a stack of crates. At exactly 6:42 a.m., she watched a figure emerge from the shadows. It wore a MacShip uniform, but its movements were wrong, jerky, like a marionette. As it placed the package on the belt, it turned. Sarah stifled a scream. The figure had her face, but its eyes were empty, and its smile stretched impossibly wide as it raised a finger to its lips. In its other hand, it held a piece of paper covered in tally marks, hundreds of them, expanding off the edges. The next morning, employees arrived to find the returns department empty except for a single package on the conveyor belt. Same sender, same water stain, same weight. But this time, the recipient was different. It was addressed to Sarah Collins, 4891 Sycamore Lane. Security footage would later show Sarah entering the building at 6:41 a.m. At 6:42, there was 1 minute of static. When the image cleared, there were two Sarahs, one placing a package on the belt, one watching from behind the crates, then three Sarahs, then four. The cameras shorted out